I still remember the exact pressure of her fingers digging into my wrist. Cold, shaking, desperate. She looked at me with eyes that had already seen too much, and she whispered words I can still hear when I close my eyes at night. Please, don't let him find me. That was 3 months ago. I was working my usual route that Tuesday night, checking the backlots near the industrial district on the east side. I run security for a chain of warehouses. Nothing glamorous. Most nights it's just walking the perimeter, checking locks, making sure no one's trying to break into shipping containers. Quiet work. Predictable. I liked it that way. It was just after midnight when I finished my second round. The air was cold, that kind of November cold that gets into your bones. I was heading back to my truck, parked near the loading dock of Warehouse 7, when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Something between a gasp and a sob, coming from the direction of the old chain-link fence that separated our property from the abandoned textile mill next door. I stopped walking, listened. For a few seconds there was nothing but the hum of the highway half a mile away and the wind rattling through empty pallets. Then I heard it again, closer this time. Someone was moving through the gravel on the other side of the fence, stumbling, trying to be quiet, but failing. I walked toward the sound, keeping my flashlight off. Years of this job taught me that sometimes you want to see what's happening before you announce yourself. As I got closer to the fence, I could make out a shape in the darkness. A person, moving slowly, hunched over, one hand pressed against the chain link like they needed it to stay upright. When I was about 10 feet away, she turned and saw me. Even in the poor light I could see her face. Young, maybe mid-20s, dark hair stuck to her forehead with sweat despite the cold, and pregnant, very pregnant. Her other hand was cradled under her belly, supporting the weight. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She just stared at me like she was trying to decide if I was another threat or the answer to a prayer. Then she took 2 shaky steps toward the fence and reached through the gap where the chain link had been cut away years ago. "Please," she said. Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying for hours. "Please help me, he's coming, he's going to find me." I moved closer, instinct kicking in before logic. She grabbed my hand through the fence, both of hers now, squeezing so hard I could feel her nails digging into my skin. Her hands were freezing. She was wearing a thin jacket, torn at the shoulder, and jeans that were dirty at the knees like she'd been crawling through mud. "Who's coming?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. I've learned that panic spreads fast, and she was already on the edge of losing it completely. "My boyfriend," she said, and then she shook her head violently. "No, not my boyfriend. I don't know what he is anymore. He's been following me. I can't go home. I can't go to the police. He'll know. He always knows." She kept looking back over her shoulder, toward the dark bulk of the abandoned mill. I followed her gaze but saw nothing, just broken windows and shadows. "Come through the fence," I said. "There's a bigger gap about 20 feet that way. Come over here and we'll figure this out." She hesitated, still looking back. Then she nodded and stumbled along the fence line until she found the section where someone had peeled back the chain link years ago. She squeezed through, moving carefully because of her belly, and almost fell when she got to my side. I caught her arm and steadied her. Up close I could see more details. Her jacket had blood on it. Not a lot, but enough to notice. Fresh. Her lip was split, swollen on one side. There were bruises on her neck, the kind that come from hands, and her eyes had that glazed, shocked look of someone who's been running on adrenaline for too long. "What's your name?" I asked. "Mara," she said. "Mara Delgado." "Okay, Mara, I'm Derek. I work security here. You're safe now. Let's get you to my truck, and we'll call for help." She shook her head so hard, I thought she might hurt herself. "No, no police." "Not yet, you don't understand. He has people. He knows people in the department. If they send the wrong cop, he'll find out where I am before I can get somewhere safe." I'd heard variations of this story before. Abusive partners, stalkers, people who manipulate the system. Sometimes it was true, sometimes it wasn't. But the fear in her eyes was real, and so was the blood on her jacket. "All right," I said. "No police yet, but we need to get you inside and warmed up. You're shaking." She nodded. I started to guide her toward the warehouse, one hand under her elbow to keep her steady. She was limping, favoring her left leg. We'd made it maybe 30 feet when I heard it. A voice, male, coming from the direction of the mill. "Mara, I know you're out here." She froze. Her whole body went rigid, and she made a sound like all the air had been punched out of her lungs. Her hand shot out and grabbed my jacket, twisting the fabric. "That's him," she whispered. "Please, please don't let him see me." The voice came again, closer now. "Mara, baby, come on, stop playing games. You know this is stupid. You can't run from me." I looked around quickly. The warehouse was too far. We'd never make it to the door before he rounded the fence line. But there was a loading dock about 40 feet to our right, raised about 4 feet off the ground, with the space underneath cluttered with old equipment and empty crates. "Under there," I said, pointing. "Get under the dock and stay quiet. I'll handle this." "He'll hurt you," she said, but she was already moving, crouching down and crawling into the shadows under the loading platform. I walked back toward the fence, putting distance between myself and where Mara was hiding. I turned on my flashlight and swept it along the fence line, making it obvious I was there. Better he focused on me than went searching. It took about 20 seconds before I saw him. He came around the corner of the mill, moving fast but trying to look casual, like he was just out for a late-night walk. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a dark jacket and jeans. 30s, clean-cut, the kind of guy who probably looked normal at a grocery store or a bank. But when my flashlight hit his face, I saw his expression, and normal was the last thing he was. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping in his cheeks. And he was smiling, not a friendly smile, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind predators wear when they've cornered something. "Hey there," he called out, throwing up a hand like we were old friends. "Sorry to bother you, man. I'm looking for my girlfriend. She's pregnant, probably really scared and confused. She ran off during an argument and I'm worried about her. You seen anyone come through here?" I kept the flashlight on him. He squinted but didn't look away. He stopped on the other side of the fence, about 10 feet from me, hands in his pockets, trying to look relaxed. "Haven't seen anyone," I said. "Just me out here. You should probably call the police if she's missing." His smile didn't change. "Yeah, I thought about that. But you know how it is. She's emotional right now, hormones and all that. She gets these ideas in her head. I just want to find her and make sure she's okay. Make sure the baby's okay." "If I see her, I'll let the police know," I said. His smile finally dropped. "I don't think you understand. She needs help. She's not thinking clearly, and that baby is mine. I have a right to make sure my kid is safe." "Then call the police," I repeated. He stared at me for a long moment. The mask was slipping now. I could see the anger underneath, the barely controlled rage. His hands came out of his pockets. He took a step closer to the fence. "Look, I don't know you and you don't know me," he said, voice lower now, harder. "But I know she came through here. I've been tracking her for the last 2 hours. I know exactly where she went. So you can either tell me where she is, or I can come over there and find her myself. Your choice." I didn't move, didn't change my expression. "Property's private. You come over that fence, I'm calling the police, and you're getting arrested for trespassing." He laughed. Actually laughed. "You think that scares me? You think I care about trespassing? I've done worse things than hop a fence tonight, friend." "Then you should leave before you add assault to the list," I said. For a second I thought he was going to do it, thought he was going to climb that fence and force the situation, but then headlights swept across the lot. A car was turning into the warehouse complex, probably the overnight shift supervisor making his rounds. The man looked toward the lights, then back at me. "This isn't over," he said. "She's mine. That baby's mine, and I always get what's mine." He backed away from the fence, still watching me, then turned and walked quickly back toward the mill. I kept the flashlight on him until he disappeared around the corner. Then I waited another minute, watching, making sure he wasn't circling back. When I was sure he was gone, I went to the loading dock and crouched down. "Mara, he's gone. Come out." She crawled out slowly, leaves and dirt clinging to her jacket. She was crying now, silent tears running down her face. "You saw him. You saw what he's like." "I saw him," I said. "And now we're calling the police. I don't care what he told you about having people in the department. We're calling them now." She didn't argue this time. I think seeing him again, hearing his voice, had pushed her past the point where she could keep running on her own. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. While we waited for the police, I got her into my truck and turned on the heat. She sat in the passenger seat, arms wrapped around herself, staring out the windshield at nothing. I grabbed a bottle of water from my bag and handed it to her. She took it but didn't drink. "How long has he been doing this?" I asked. 6 months, she said quietly, "since I told him I was pregnant. Before that, he was different. Or maybe he wasn't and I just didn't see it. He started getting possessive, checking my phone, showing up at my work. Then he hit me the first time and I tried to leave. That's when it got really bad. You have family, friends. I stayed with my sister for a week. He found me, showed up at her house at 3 in the morning, broke a window. My sister has kids. I couldn't put them in danger, so I left. I've been moving around, staying at shelters, cheap motels, but he keeps finding me. I don't know how, I had a guess. Does he know your phone number? She looked at me and I could see the realization hitting her. I turned off location services. Doesn't matter. If he has the right software, the right connections, he can track the phone itself. You need to get rid of it. She pulled a phone out of her pocket, an older model with a cracked screen, and stared at it like it had betrayed her. Then she opened the truck door and threw it as hard as she could into the darkness of the lot. The police arrived 12 minutes later. 2 patrol cars, lights off because I'd told the dispatcher the suspect had left the area but might be watching. 4 officers, 2 male, 2 female. I gave them a description of the man, told them everything he'd said, everything I'd seen. Mara told her story, halting at first, then faster as it all came pouring out. One of the officers, a woman in her 40s with grey streaks in her hair pulled back in a tight bun, crouched down next to the truck and talked to Mara while her partner took my statement. I watched the way she spoke to Mara, gentle but professional, and I could see Mara starting to trust her. They called an ambulance to check Mara and the baby. While we waited, the female officer came over to me. "We know who he is," she said quietly. "Marcus Vance. He's been on our radar for a while. Assault charges, harassment, violating restraining orders. He's good at walking the line, never quite doing enough to get serious time, and he does have a cousin who works in the department. Records clerk. We'll make sure information doesn't go through the wrong channels." "What happens to her now?" I asked. "We'll get her to a safe house, somewhere he can't find. She'll need to press charges, get a restraining order, the whole process, but at least she'll be off the streets." The ambulance arrived and the EMTs checked Mara over. Elevated blood pressure, dehydrated, bruised and battered, but the baby was okay. Strong heartbeat. They wanted to take her to the hospital for a full examination, and she agreed. Before they loaded her into the ambulance, she looked at me. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." "You would have found another way," I said. "You made it this far." She tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. Then they closed the ambulance doors and drove away, one of the patrol cars following as escort. The police spent another hour searching the area around the mill, but Marcus Vance was long gone. They found signs that he'd been camping there, watching the warehouses, empty food containers, a sleeping bag, binoculars. He'd been hunting her, patient and methodical. They told me to be careful for the next few weeks, in case he came back looking for me. They gave me a case number and a direct line to the detective who would be handling Mara's case. Then they left, and I was alone in the parking lot again. I finished my shift, checking the warehouses like nothing had happened, but I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the fear in her eyes, about how close she'd come to being caught, about what might have happened if I'd been 5 minutes later, or if I'd ignored the sound and gone to my truck. The next day, I called the number the detective had given me. He told me Mara was in a safe house, that she'd given a full statement, and that they'd issued a warrant for Marcus Vance's arrest. He hadn't been found yet, but they were looking. A week later, the detective called me. Marcus Vance had been arrested trying to access the hospital records where Mara had been treated. He'd convinced his cousin to pull the files, and someone in the department had flagged it. He was being held without bail on multiple charges, including stalking, assault, harassment, and attempted intimidation of a witness. 2 weeks after that, Mara called me. The detective had given her my number, said it was okay to reach out if she wanted to thank me. Her voice was stronger than the night I'd met her. She told me she was safe, that she was working with a victim's advocate, that Marcus was going to trial and his lawyer was already talking about a plea deal that would keep him in prison for years. She also told me something else. She'd started going to therapy, working through everything that had happened, and her therapist had asked her what she would have done if she hadn't found me that night. "I don't know," she told me on the phone. "I think I would have kept running until I couldn't run anymore, until he caught me, or until something worse happened. I was so tired, so scared. I'd stopped thinking clearly. When I saw you, it was like my brain switched back on, like I remembered I was a person who deserved help." We talked for a while longer. She told me she was planning to stay in the area after the baby was born, that she had family who'd stepped up once they knew Marcus was in custody. She sounded hopeful. Careful, but hopeful. Before we hung up, she said something that stuck with me. I thought I was alone. That's what he wanted me to think, that I was alone and no one would believe me and no one would help. But I wasn't alone. You were there. 3 months later, I still think about that night. I think about the moment her fingers closed around my wrist, the desperation in her voice. I think about Marcus Vance standing on the other side of that fence, smiling his predator smile, convinced he had every right to hunt her down. I think about how many other people are out there right now, running from someone who won't let them go. How many are hiding in the dark, hoping someone will see them, help them, believe them. Mara had her baby 6 weeks ago. A girl. The detective told me when I called to check in. Mother and daughter are both healthy. Marcus Vance took a plea deal. 12 years, no early parole. His lawyer argued he was just a concerned father, that Mara was unstable and had provoked him. The judge didn't buy it. Not with the medical reports, the witnesses, the pattern of behavior going back years. I still work the same route, checking the same warehouses. Most nights are quiet, predictable, but I pay more attention now to the sounds that don't belong, the shadows that move wrong, because I know what I didn't fully understand before that night. Monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look normal. Sometimes they smile and use words like love and rights and concern to justify hunting someone through the dark. And sometimes the only thing standing between a monster and his prey is someone who's willing to say no, to stand in the way, to be the wall that doesn't move. I still hear her voice sometimes when I'm walking the perimeter at night. Please don't let him find me. And I think about how close it was. How easily I could have ignored that sound, finished my shift, gone home. How different her story might have ended. But I didn't ignore it. I stopped. I listened. I helped. And somewhere out there, a little girl is going to grow up with her mother because of that choice. She'll never know how close she came to a different story. She'll never know about the cold November night when her mother stumbled out of the darkness and grabbed a stranger's hand. But I know. I'll always know. And I'll always wonder about Marcus Vance, sitting in a cell, staring at walls. Does he still think about her? Does he still believe she was his, that the baby was his, that he had some kind of right to terrorize her? Does he understand what he was? Does he care? Probably not. People like him rarely do. They rewrite the story in their heads until they're the victim, until everyone else is to blame. He probably tells himself she tricked me, that I didn't understand, that she was the problem all along. He probably sits in that cell and replays every moment, finding ways to justify what he did, finding ways to make himself the wronged party. I've thought about this a lot over the past 3 months, about how someone becomes that kind of person. Was he always like that, hiding it behind a normal face and a charming smile? Or did something break inside him along the way, some switch that flipped and turned love into ownership, care into control? The detective told me Marcus had a history, not just with Mara, but before her. 2 other girlfriends had filed reports. One dropped the charges after he showed up at her workplace every day for a week, just standing across the street, watching. She said it was easier to drop it than to keep looking over her shoulder. The other one moved to a different state and changed her name. That's what it took for her to feel safe. 3 women that they knew about. How many others were there? How many who never reported it, who just disappeared from his life and tried to forget? How many who are still out there, still afraid, still checking their rearview mirrors? The system failed those women. It failed Mara too, until that night. She'd tried to get help. She'd filed a police report after the first time he hit her. She'd gone to court for a restraining order. But Marcus knew how to play the game. He knew exactly how far he could push without crossing the line that would get him serious jail time. He'd show up just outside the legal distance specified in the restraining order. He'd send messages through mutual friends instead of contacting her directly. He'd follow her, but always in public places where he could claim it was coincidence. And his cousin in the police department, the records clerk, she'd been feeding him information, not directly helping him, but looking the other way, maybe believing his version of events, maybe thinking Mara was exaggerating, being dramatic, trying to keep a father from his child. People believe what they want to believe, especially when it comes from family. The cousin lost her job. Internal affairs investigated after Marcus was arrested, and they found the pattern. Dozens of file accesses that she had no business making, all related to Mara's case. Location of the safe house where Mara first stayed. Names of the officers who'd taken her initial report. Even the hospital where she'd gone after one of the assaults. The cousin claimed she was just curious. that Marcus had asked her about his girlfriend and she'd looked it up to help family. But the investigators didn't buy it. She was fired and charged as an accessory. I think about her sometimes too. Did she know what her cousin really was? Did she see the signs and ignore them? Or did she genuinely believe she was helping someone reconnect with their pregnant girlfriend? It's easy to be manipulated by people like Marcus. They're good at it. They've spent years learning how to present themselves, how to control the narrative, how to make other people doubt their own perceptions. They know which buttons to push, which words to use. They can cry on command, make themselves look like the victim, turn the whole situation around so that suddenly they're the one being persecuted. Mara told me, during one of our phone calls after everything settled, that Marcus had done this throughout their relationship. Whenever she tried to confront him about his behavior, he'd turn it around. He'd say she was being paranoid, that she was the one with trust issues, that she was damaging the relationship with her accusations. He'd bring up things from her past, insecurities she'd shared with him in intimate moments, and use them as weapons. He'd tell her she was lucky he put up with her, that no one else would want someone so broken. That's how abuse works. It's not just physical violence, it's psychological warfare. It's breaking someone down so completely that they start to believe the abuser's version of reality. They start to think they're the problem. They start to think they deserve it. Mara said there were moments, even while she was running from him, when she'd wonder if she was overreacting, if maybe he did love her in his own way, if maybe she should give him another chance, for the baby's sake. That's how deep the manipulation went. Even with bruises on her body and fear in her heart, part of her still wondered if she was the one in the wrong. That's what makes me angriest when I think about that night. Not just what he did, but what he made her believe about herself. He didn't just hurt her body. He tried to destroy her sense of reality, her trust in her own perceptions, her belief that she deserved safety and respect. But he didn't succeed. She kept running. She kept surviving. And when she grabbed my hand that night, she was making a choice to trust, to reach out, to believe that someone might help her. After everything she'd been through, after all the times the system had failed her, after all the ways Marcus had tried to isolate her and make her believe she was alone, she still had enough strength left to ask for help. That takes courage I can't even comprehend. I've never been in that position. I've never had to run for my life from someone who claimed to love me. I've never had to choose between the danger I know and the uncertainty of trusting a stranger in the dark. But she did, and she made the right choice. And I'm grateful every day that I was the one standing on the other side of that fence, that I was someone who stopped and listened and helped instead of walking away. Because I could have walked away. That's the thing that haunts me sometimes. I could have ignored that sound. I could have convinced myself it was an animal, or the wind, or something that wasn't my problem. I could have decided that my job was just checking locks and watching warehouses, not getting involved in other people's emergencies. I've thought about that version of the night a lot, the version where I don't investigate the sound, where Mara stays hidden on the other side of the fence, terrified and alone, while Marcus searches for her in the darkness. Where maybe he finds her, or maybe she keeps running until she collapses somewhere even more dangerous. I think about the baby who wouldn't have been born safe, who might have come into this world in the midst of violence and fear. I think about Mara, who might not have survived that night if things had gone differently, and I think about all the other nights, all the other moments, where someone heard something strange and ignored it, where someone saw something wrong and walked away, where the difference between life and death, between safety and horror, came down to whether one person decided to get involved or mind their own business. We live in a world where people are told not to get involved, where the advice is to call the authorities and let them handle it. And sometimes that's the right choice. Sometimes getting involved means putting yourself in danger for no reason. But sometimes the authorities are too far away, or they've already failed, or they can't be trusted. Sometimes the only thing standing between someone and disaster is a regular person who decides to care. I'm not a hero. I want to make that clear. I'm not special. I'm just a security guard who heard someone in trouble and decided to help. That should be normal. That should be what everyone does. But it's not. And that's the problem. The detective told me that when they interviewed Marcus after his arrest, he showed no remorse. None. He insisted that Mara was his property, that the baby was his right, that he was justified in everything he'd done. He claimed she was mentally unstable, that she'd made up the abuse, that she'd manipulated everyone, including me. He said I'd interfered in a private family matter and that I had no right to keep him from his child. His child. He kept saying that. His child. Like the baby was an object he owned, not a human being with her own right to safety and a mother's love. Like his genetic contribution gave him unlimited authority over two other people's lives. The prosecutor said Marcus's complete lack of remorse actually helped the case. It made it harder for his lawyer to argue that he deserved leniency, that he'd learned his lesson, that he'd changed. How can you claim someone has changed when they don't even acknowledge they did anything wrong? The plea deal was the best option, the prosecutor explained to me. Going to trial would have meant Mara having to testify, having to face Marcus in court, having to relive everything in front of a jury. It would have taken months, maybe over a year, and there was always the risk, however small, that a jury might believe his version of events, that they might see a clean-cut man in a suit and think he couldn't possibly be the monster the prosecution claimed, that they might blame Mara for staying with him, for not leaving sooner, for getting pregnant in the first place. Victim blaming is real. It happens every day in courtrooms across the country. Women are asked what they were wearing, why they didn't fight harder, why they didn't leave sooner. As if abuse victims are supposed to behave rationally while trapped in irrational situations. As if fear and trauma don't affect decision-making. As if love and hope and the desperate desire to believe someone can change aren't powerful forces that keep people stuck in dangerous relationships. Mara didn't want to risk it. She didn't want to sit in a courtroom and be cross-examined by Marcus's lawyer, who would try to paint her as vindictive, unstable, manipulative. She didn't want her past examined, her choices questioned, her wounds displayed for strangers to judge. She just wanted it to be over. She wanted Marcus locked away where he couldn't hurt her or her daughter. She wanted to start healing, so she accepted the plea deal. 12 years. He'll be in prison until his daughter is old enough to understand what kind of man her biological father is, old enough to make her own choices about whether she ever wants to meet him. Mara told me she hopes her daughter never does. She hopes her daughter grows up happy and safe, surrounded by people who love her without conditions, who see her as a person and not a possession. She hopes her daughter never knows what it's like to be afraid in her own home, to walk on eggshells around someone who claims to love her, to wonder if today is the day that love turns violent. I hope that too. I hope that little girl grows up strong and confident and free from the shadow of her father's violence. I hope she becomes someone who stands up for herself and others, someone who recognizes the warning signs that her mother missed, someone who never has to run through the dark begging strangers for help. But I also know that hope isn't enough. That little girl needs a world that's safer than the one her mother grew up in. She needs a world where abuse isn't normalized, where controlling behavior is recognized as a warning sign and not mistaken for love, where victims are believed and supported instead of questioned and blamed. She needs a world where there are more people willing to stop and listen when they hear someone crying in the dark, more people willing to stand between predators and their prey, more people willing to risk involvement, willing to care, willing to be uncomfortable if it means keeping someone safe. I've started volunteering with a local domestic violence organization. 2 nights a week I help at the shelter. Mostly I do security work, which is what I know. I check the perimeter, make sure no one unauthorized is hanging around, walk residents to their cars when they have appointments. But sometimes I talk to the women staying there, share my story about Mara, let them know that there are people who will help, who will believe them, who will stand with them. The director of the shelter told me that a lot of victims feel like they're invisible, like they're screaming for help and no one can hear them. They're surrounded by people in their daily lives, co-workers and neighbors and family, but the abuse is private, hidden behind closed doors. And the abuser is often charming in public, well-liked, the kind of person no one would suspect. So when the victim finally works up the courage to tell someone, they're often met with disbelief. He seems so nice. Are you sure you're not exaggerating? Maybe you're being too sensitive. That disbelief is another weapon in the abuser's arsenal. It keeps victims trapped, convinced that no one will believe them, that asking for help is pointless. It's one of the reasons Mara ran instead of going straight to the police. She'd been told implicitly and explicitly that her truth was questionable, that Marcus's word, his cousin's connections, his respectable appearance, would count for more than her bruises and her fear. She was almost right. If she hadn't run into me that night, if she hadn't had a witness who saw Marcus's true face, who could corroborate her story, it might have played out differently. The police might have taken a report and filed it away. Marcus might have gotten a warning, maybe a night in jail, then been released with another restraining order he would have found ways around. That's the reality for too many victims. The system is supposed to protect them, but it's built on procedures and evidence and burden of proof. It moves slowly. It requires documentation, witnesses, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And abusers know this. They know how to avoid creating evidence. They know how to isolate their victims so there are no witnesses. They know how to make their violence invisible. Marcus made mistakes that night. He let his rage override his caution. He followed Mara into a space where there was a witness, where his mask slipped, where someone else could see what he really was. That was his downfall. His need to control her was stronger than his instinct for self-preservation. I'm glad he made that mistake. I'm glad his arrogance and his conviction that he had a right to hunt her made him careless. Because if he'd been more careful, more patient, he might have gotten away with it. He might have found her later, somewhere more isolated, somewhere without witnesses, and the ending of this story would be very different. But I also know that we can't rely on abusers making mistakes. We can't build a system that only protects victims when they get lucky, when they happen to run into someone willing to help, when their abuser happens to slip up in front of a witness. We need a system that believes victims from the start. That takes allegations seriously, even when the accused seems respectable, and the victim seems messy or emotional or imperfect. That understands trauma and fear and how they affect behavior. That recognizes the patterns of abuse and acts on them before they escalate to murder. Because that's where stories like Mara's often end, in murder. Domestic violence is one of the leading causes of death for women in this country. Women are killed by intimate partners every single day. Some of them saw it coming, tried to get help, were let down by a system that didn't act fast enough. Others never got the chance to run, never made it to a shelter or a police station or a fence line where a stranger might hear them calling for help. Mara survived. Her daughter will grow up with a mother, but there's another woman out there right now who won't survive, who's in the same position Mara was 3 months ago, terrified and trapped and running out of options. Maybe she'll get lucky like Mara did. Maybe she'll find her own fence line, her own witness, her own path to safety. Or maybe she won't. Maybe she's one of the statistics I've been reading about since that night, one of the women who will die this year at the hands of someone who claimed to love her. I think about that a lot, about probability and chance and luck, about how Mara's survival came down to a series of small decisions and coincidences. She happened to run toward the warehouse complex instead of in a different direction. I happened to be outside instead of in the guard shack. I happened to investigate the sound instead of ignoring it. The overnight supervisor happened to drive by at the right moment, making Marcus think twice about climbing the fence. The police happened to take the case seriously, happened to know about Marcus's history, happened to catch his cousin accessing files she shouldn't have. Remove any one of those factors and the story changes. Maybe Mara dies that night. Maybe she stays on the run living in fear until Marcus finds her somewhere less lucky. Maybe she gives birth alone and afraid, trying to figure out how to protect a newborn from a man who won't stop hunting them. But those factors aligned. The universe, or fate, or random chance gave Mara exactly what she needed when she needed it. It gave her a gap in a fence, and someone on the other side willing to help. I don't believe in destiny or divine intervention. I think we live in a random, chaotic world where terrible things happen to good people all the time. But I also think we have choices. We can choose to pay attention or ignore. We can choose to help or walk away. We can choose to make ourselves available to be the answer to someone's desperate prayer, whether or not anyone is listening to prayers. That night, I chose to investigate a sound that didn't belong. That's all it was. A simple choice. And it saved 2 lives. I carry that with me now. The weight of knowing that small choices matter, that paying attention matters, that being willing to get involved, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient or potentially dangerous, matters. 3 months later, I still drive past that section of fence where she came through. The chain link is still cut, still bent back. Sometimes I slow down and look at the abandoned mill beyond it, dark windows reflecting the security lights. I think about him crouched in there, watching, waiting, hunting. And I think about her, running through the dark, pregnant and terrified, looking for anywhere that felt safe, finding a gap in a fence, finding me on the other side. I still hear her whispering that night when the wind is right and the lot is empty. Please don't let him find me. I didn't let him find her. But I wonder sometimes in the dark hours before dawn, how many others are out there right now, running from someone who won't stop? How many are looking for a gap in a fence, a stranger who will listen, a moment of safety in the middle of hell? I hope they find it. I hope someone is there when they need help. I hope they're not alone. Because Mara was right about one thing. The worst part wasn't the violence or the fear or the running. The worst part was thinking she was alone, that no one would believe her, that no one would help. She wasn't alone that night, and maybe that's all any of us can do. Be there. Listen. Stand between the monsters and the people they hunt. It's not much, but sometimes it's everything. Sometimes it's the difference between a mother holding her newborn daughter in safety and another name added to the list of women who didn't survive the men who claimed to love them. Sometimes it's the difference between a little girl growing up with her mother and growing up with only stories about the woman she never got to know. Sometimes it's the difference between hope and despair, between survival and tragedy, between a story that ends with healing and one that ends with grief. That night, 3 months ago, I was that difference for Mara. I was the gap in the fence, the voice that said, yes, I'll help, the wall that stood between her and the monster hunting her in the dark. I'll never forget it. Never forget her hand, gripping mine, cold and desperate. Never forget the sound of Marcus's voice calling her name like he owned her. Never forget the weight of that moment when I had to decide whether to get involved or let it be someone else's problem. I'm glad I got involved. I'm glad I made the choice to help. And I hope that somewhere out there someone else is making the same choice right now. Someone else is hearing a sound that doesn't belong and deciding to investigate. Someone else is seeing fear in a stranger's eyes and choosing to stand with them instead of walking away. Because that's how we change things. Not with grand gestures or dramatic heroics, but with small choices made in dark parking lots and quiet moments when no one is watching. We choose to see. We choose to care. We choose to help. And sometimes that choice saves a life. O Claude pode cometer erros, confira sempre as respostas.